All right, it is 5:01, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming to our presentation on benefits planning in retirement. Our presenter is Joe Kukla. He's an attorney here in the Twin Cities, and this is his specialty, all things people with disabilities and their legal needs, benefits, etc. He does presentations on benefits all over the Twin Cities, so we're really fortunate to have him. A lot of people submitted questions in advance, and so Joe has shaped his presentation around people's questions. But if you would like to ask a question of Joe while he's presenting, you can come off mute and ask it, or you can ask it in the chat, and I will watch the chat for questions as well. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Joe.
All right, thank you, Noel. And yeah, I appreciate everybody showing up tonight. Happy to do this. This is, as Noel said, a presentation that do on a fairly regular basis, maybe half a dozen times a year, working with different organizations around the Twin Cities. I do a pretty regular seminar with PACER. I also work with Fraser, the Down Syndrome Association of Minnesota, and I'm on the board of directors for Opportunity Partners, which is based out here in Minnetonka, and so I do presentations for them as well. So this is something I've been doing for a long time. Been practicing in this area for I think it's 18 years now, and been doing work with primarily with people with disabilities for the majority of that time. And I got into it because I have a younger brother with developmental disabilities, and got to know a little bit as I was growing up about what he goes through in terms of having my parents set up support for him. And then, of course, as he got older, I watched him with, on his journey to employment and finding a place to live. And he's doing pretty well right now. He's working at the Jerry's, the grocery store in Edina, and he's living in a group home run by Hammer. But all of that experience with my brother Jake, it got me into doing this type of work because I'm set up as his successor guardian, and I'll be trustee of his trust once both of my parents are deceased and that trust is fully funded. So that's sort of leads into that's one of the things I'll talk about today is the trust funding. But primarily, my practice at this point then is doing trust planning, asset planning. We do guardianship work, we do conservatorships, but the basis of all of it is understanding how Social Security and how medical assistance programs work. And Noel asked me to present tonight, primarily focusing on the MA EPD program. The rules revolve or surrounding that, and then how things how your life is affected if you no longer have MA EPD or when you're getting onto it. So I have a slideshow that's loaded up, ready to go. Hopefully you can all see that on the screen. I'm going to follow that as a basic outline for what we're going to talk about. But as Noel mentioned, I do have the questions that were sent to her in advance, and I've just noted a few places where it would be appropriate to address those. But I'm also willing to open it up to a little bit more of like a conversational format, just because I'm sitting here staring at myself in the computer screen, and it'd be a little bit more engaging if we had some questions along the way, and I was able to answer those for everybody. So we'll try and do that as best we can. but we'll get started on just going through the slides, and I'll try and give you guys as much information as I can possibly think of. So let me see if I can figure out. There we go. So, the basis of this conversation is to talk about a person with special needs um, who will require medical assistance or social security for their own support. Um, that's the basis of everything that we get into regarding like the employment issues, retirement accounts, trust planning, ABLE accounts. Will address each of those things, but it is all related to what the person is receiving in terms of medical assistance or social security benefits, because those programs and the eligibility requirements for those programs is going to determine what we have to do in order to make sure that the person has the support that they need, both from the government assistance, but then also the ability to support themselves independently, either through work um, or the acquiring of other resources that can essentially make life better beyond just what the government assistance programs provide. So generally, a real quick overview, because I assume most of you who are connected with RISE and are working through RISE, or whether you're here because of a family member, you're aware of the basic rules of Social Security and medical assistance. And so, of course, with Social Security, we have multiple programs. We most people start out, if they have a developmental disability, most people will start out at age 18 on the SSI program, and that has a $2,000 asset limit to stay eligible and forces you to prove how you are spending the money that they are providing every month for your basic needs. Medical assistance, the basic program has a $3,000 asset limit. So for people who are on waivered services, they would, of course, have to um, prove to the county on a regular basis that they do not have assets that exceed the limit in order to stay qualified for receiving um, the waivered service support, whether that be through DD waiver, which is developmental disability waiver, CADI waivers, or through that. Eligibility for those programs is all based on a $3,000 asset limit. That goes for people who receive in-home support or live in a group home or unassisted living facility. The support that everybody gets through the county is all through those waivered service programs. And the entry into the waivered service programs is the qualification for medical assistance, which, again, at its most basic level, requires people to have less than $3,000 in total assets.
Hey, Joe, we've got a question in the chat. Is the
Oh,
asset limit per month or per year? How does
at
that
all
work?
times. It's not like, I guess, what people are accumulating. I think the way that the question is asked sounds like you're asking if there's an income limit. For MA, there is no income issue. But if you accumulate assets and you are not spending through those, so let's say you're working and you have money in the bank and you're not spending through it. It's just being accumulated and it's saving. Well, when you go to renew your medical assistance the next time, they're going to ask for basically an accounting of all of your assets. And if your checking account at the bank is more than $3,000, you won't qualify for the MA programs going forward from there until you have spent down or disposed of those assets. So as we get into the conversation a little bit further, that's where things like ABLE and the Special Needs Trust come into play. If a person has assets that exceed the asset limit, then they're going to have to dispose of those, either by spending down or transferring them to an account that excludes those assets. Within medical assistance and Social Security, however, there are also programs that have variations on these eligibility requirements. Within Social Security, those would be the other benefit programs that we refer to as SSDI or RSDI. And these are primarily programs that people become eligible for a little bit later in their life. Like I said, with SSI, that's usually applied for when a person is 18 years old and they've never accumulated any assets, but they've also never worked. And so they've never contributed to the Social Security program themselves. They've never earned work credits. If you are working as an adult, you are earning work credits with the Social Security program. And when you have earned enough work credits with the Social Security program, you can apply for SSDI if you are not working a full 40-hour week. The work credits will qualify you for what the DI part of that, which is disability insurance, which would help a person sort of meet or have their ends meet, and if you're only physically or mentally capable of working, say, like 15 or 20 hours a week, SSDI is the program that will cover the remaining hours of a standard work week of 40 hours. And so it's a benefit in addition to what you are receiving from your wages, meant to sort of support a person and allow them to continue to work even if they're not capable of working full time. The nice thing about the SSDI program is that because, again, if you qualify it for it based on your prior work and earning the credits, therefore they don't take into consideration what your available assets are. If you qualify for that program, there is no $2,000 asset limit like there is with SSI. There's simply an income limit. And that income limit is in place because, if a person is working 40 hours a week, if they are earning substantial wages, we're also not going to give them Social Security on top of that. So there's an income limit attached with SSDI, but it's not at a low rate that would jeopardize people's benefits if they are working less than a full work week. And just to be clear, the income limit does change every year. It's adjusted by the legislature. It's determined by DHS on an annual basis. And so it's not an exact number. Just know that if you're working too much, if you're earning too much, then you won't qualify for Social Security benefits. But if you are working part-time or half the week on average, then you may qualify for the SSDI benefits. RSDI is a third program from Social Security. That's typically a benefit that's provided for a person whose parents are either retired themselves or they are deceased. RSDI is essentially a survivor's benefit for a person with a permanent disability who was diagnosed with that disability prior to age 22, and they're not working full time and earning income that would disqualify them for that benefit. So I go over those just to clarify that not everybody that's on Social Security has an asset limit and a requirement to move assets in order to stay eligible for their benefits. With medical assistance, it is a little bit different, and so you've got to look at them distinctly. If a person is on Social Security and medical assistance, we've got to find out what medical assistance program they are on. As I was talking about before, the basic medical assistance has a $3,000 asset limit. But if a person is working and they are earning money, there is an option to be on the MA EPD program. And EPD, for those who don't know, stands for Employed Persons with Disabilities. The EPD program can be accessed by anybody who's earning more than $65 a month. And so that could qualify a great number of people, and hopefully a number of people that are here tonight, hopefully a number of people that work with RISE. Because if you're employed in the community, then hopefully you are working enough that you are earning more than $65 a month and have that money to spare, I suppose, that your entire paycheck is not going to your basic needs, your living expenses. So if you do have that, if you have 60 or $65 per month that can be used for other purposes, you can use that to pay the premium that is required by the medical or the MAEPD program to stay eligible. The bonus of MAEPD, again, for those who aren't on it at this point, is that you do not have any asset limit whatsoever. So you could be working, earning income, putting that money aside in a savings account, a checking account. You could even invest it under your own name, and those assets will not count against your eligibility for MA. It's entirely based on your diagnosis of disability. And so if you are on the MAEPD program, you accumulate assets. Um, Presumably then, if you are working, you are also on SSDI or RSDI. You are also allowed to accumulate assets. And so therefore, you don't really have this need to spend down or transfer assets out of your name. So that is sort of the ideal scenario for a person who does need MA, who does need some support. If you are working and earning income, you can qualify for that support without worrying about asset limits and restrictions. Um, and so again, that's a good place to be. That's where we hope most people, especially through an organization like RISE, are getting to. But this is a good spot where I had a couple of questions from that Noel sent me in advance that I think would be appropriate to address here. So after I sort of talk about that overview of those programs, the questions I got. Well, let's start with this one. It said, when should I start planning for retirement? And does the timing matter based on my assets or my benefits? And so I liked this question here because as I'm talking about this, so a person who's working, who's on an MAEPD, who's maybe on SSDI or RSDI, but is working enough that they can set some money aside. The direct answer to that question is anybody who is working for a living should be planning for their retirement at some point. None of us is going to work for our entire life. The hope is that we retire sooner rather than later with enough or sufficient resources to be able to continue supporting ourselves even when we're not working. That's the general goal for everybody, right? Is that you do reach retirement age, that you have put enough away that you can stop working and still live comfortably with all of your needs met financially based on what you were able to save during your lifetime. But that does get a little bit trickier for a person with a disability who may be dependent on the on outside support. Uh, if a person is capable of working and earning money that accumulates into a retirement account or a nice savings account, again, they'll remain eligible for their benefits throughout their lifetime. But those medical assistance benefits, or I suppose I should say the need for those medical assistance benefits, doesn't necessarily go away when a person retires, right? In fact, in a lot of cases, those increase, or the need increases. So the question is, when you stop working, how does that affect your status and your eligibility for those programs? As I mentioned with MAEPD, well, first of all, I'll tell you just real quickly, with Social Security, the person can continue earning Social Security and can continue receiving those payments even if they stop working. So now if your income goes down, even if it goes down to zero, SSDI and RSDI are still programs that are available to those individuals. So that support will always, that financial support should always be there. MA, on the other hand, is I guess what we like to refer to as the more personal support. That's the direct support. That's your in-home living support. That's support for physical disabilities, job coaches, job training, but just in general, it covers support for a person um, in their home or just in the community in general. So when a person is on MAEPD, they're receiving that support while working. And again, they have no asset limit. They're accumulating those assets. It's not affecting their eligibility for that support. When a person retires, however, or simply stops working for another reason, if physical disabilities become overwhelming, if they lose their job for any other reason, then they do not pick up any other work. Let's say a person stops working and they don't go back to work. Well, the requirement is that they're going to have to downgrade to the regular medical assistance program. That can be a big deal for somebody who was on MAEPD, because while you did not have an asset limit uh, and were accumulating assets, now all of a sudden, if you're not working anymore, you can't just pay that $65 a month premium to stay eligible for the EPD program. You've got to qualify for the basic MA, which has a $3,000 asset limit, which now means that you have to dispose of all of those excess assets that you accumulated while working. That can be a little bit abrupt if people are not prepared for it. DHS does give everybody, the state of Minnesota does give everybody a grace period, so to speak. If you stop working, you get you get 4 months from the time you stopped working uh, before they count the assets against your $3,000 limit to continue your medical assistance. So what that means is a person, let's say, loses their job for whatever reason. Um, they're now at home, they're no longer working, but their medical assistance support will continue for a period of 4 months. At the end of that 4 months, the county is going to evaluate whether you meet the qualifications for basic MA if you have not gone back and gotten another job somewhere else. Okay. So what that means is after 4 months, in order to continue receiving the support services that you always have, you're going to have to make sure that you have less than $3,000 in personal assets at that time. And so it makes sense that a person, even if they are not subject to asset limits during their working lifetime, that they would start planning for that time when they may have uh, a requirement to meet that asset limit again because they are no longer working and they don't intend to go back to work, or there's just not an opportunity to go back to work. Um, so that's the primary issue with that. When we're talking about assets themselves, another question that I got is what qualifies as an asset against asset limits. Um, what we're talking about is primarily like the cash. I've been referencing savings accounts, checking accounts, investment accounts, anything that a person has uh, access to that can be turned into cash is also an asset. So the language that the county uses, that DHS uses, is they call them available assets. And available assets, again, would be anything that you could uh, turn into cash, which the the I guess the justification for this at its basic level is that DHS, the state of Minnesota, looks at it and says, if you have cash available to you, you can use that to pay for the things that you're asking the county to provide to you. So if you have Metro Mobility or if you have IHS, in-home services, but you have all of this cash available, then the county says you need to spend that cash before we will provide support for those services. So that's when you renew your application for MA or your eligibility for MA, that's what they're looking at. They're asking you to report your available assets. I suppose that the reason why this question came in is related to retirement accounts. And so I'll explain that even with that definition of available assets, there are also what the county or the state considers excluded assets. So an excluded asset, the primary example that we think of with an excluded asset is a person's home. If you own a home, whether you got that through an inheritance or you bought it yourself, and if your name is on the title to the home or the condominium or whatever you own, that is an excluded asset. And so if you do have that $3,000 asset limit applied to you at some point, the home that you own and that you live in is excluded and always will be. Your one vehicle, your primary mode of transportation, if it's personal, that will also be excluded. Um,
I have
doesn't
a
even really
question.
matter the value. I guess I should backtrack a little bit. If your home is worth more than, I think the current value limit is $750,000 in Minnesota. So if you have a home, like let's say that you've inherited and it's worth more than $750,000, that could potentially be evaluated and counted against you if you have an asset limit for MA, which would force you to sell the home. But most of us are not don't have that issue. So I'll say if the home is less than $750,000, it's an excluded asset. People who own a vehicle, it is, there is no value limit on the vehicle. So you could be driving around a Lamborghini and it would still be an excluded asset as far as your MA eligibility is concerned. Other excluded assets would include like personal property. So your computer, your furniture, your clothing, your books, your video games, your bicycle, all of those things are considered excluded assets, primarily because they're sort of like what the state would consider garage sale items. Even if you have nice stuff, uh, they're not going to go to the trouble of making you inventory all of the things that might have resale value. So they just say that your personal property items are excluded from those asset limits.
Can
So
I ask a
really what we're
question?
looking at is the cash. And then the
I think there's a
follow,
question, Joe, from the group.
oh,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. Yeah, go
Can I
ahead.
ask a question? What happens if you do own a home? The person with disability owns a home and then they were to pass away. Where does that home go?
Yeah, so now you're getting into like the estate recovery that is applied to anybody that receives medical assistance during their lifetime. The state of Minnesota is going to keep a tab on all of the support and the benefits that they provided to that individual. And at their death, they have an opportunity to make a claim against the assets of the person's estate. So while a home was excluded during a person's lifetime as an available asset, at death, it could be subject to that estate recovery. If if the title to the home is in joint ownership, meaning that there is more than one person on that title, that could be a spouse, that could be another family member, that could just be a friend if you have an arrangement where they're on the title of the house. So as long as anybody else is on that title other than the deceased MA recipient, the state cannot force that person to sell, but they will apply a lien that is with that property in perpetuity, essentially. It's a 10-year lien, but they can renew that every 10 years until the earth explodes, I suppose. But then once the house is eventually sold, that's when DHS makes their claim and collects. So yeah,
Would that apply to all the assets?
yes, so it applies to all probate assets. It applies to the person's probate estate. So any personal assets can be subject to a claim. However, DHS has very specific rules about when that claim is generated, right? So a person with a permanent disability may be receiving medical assistance throughout their lifetime, but depending on the programs that they are on, that claim may not start until later in life. However, if a person has a special needs trust or an ABLE account, whatever assets are in those accounts will be dealt with separately. So there are a number of different things that are going on in terms of the estate recovery. Primarily, what you need to know is that assets that are excluded during a person's lifetime do become eligible to be claimed or do become subject to those claims for estate recovery at a person's death. It just um, isn't as straightforward. There are some things that can protect those assets, but primarily the state of Minnesota is going to have a claim for reimbursement for the support that they provided to a person during their lifetime.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. And
Sarah,
so
you've
I'm
got a
kind of,
question?
oh, is there another one? Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, my question is kind of going back a little bit. Um, if a person stops working, has been on MAEPD, if they continue to pay the premium, does the no asset limit last for 12 months or is it just the four if they continue paying the premium?
Well, if you're not working, then um, then they will not allow the person to continue paying the premium just to stay on the EPD program. So if you're out of work for 4 months, then that's when you have to transition to regular MA. If you transition to that regular MA, you do get a little bit more of an extended time period to spend down and meet the asset limit. Um, that is, that extended time period does last 12 months from the date that you stopped working. Um, but there is no option to continue paying the premium every month to stay on EPD. It's not an elective, I suppose. The EPD is pretty strict in terms of that person has to be working in order to qualify for this program. So if you're not working after 4 months, then that's when you would lose the eligibility for the EPD benefit. After 12 months, if you have not spent down or disposed of the assets to a trust or to an ABLE account, then that's when you could lose MA altogether. Um, and so as I'm talking about these asset limits and these different programs, yeah, I certainly want to address the retirement accounts because I got a few questions on that, and I know Noel that was the reason why Noel contacted me in the first place was to address the retirement account situation. Generally speaking, while a person is working and earning money and contributing to their own retirement account, those retirement accounts are going to be excluded assets if a person is not on MAEPD. But they are treated just with the same approach that I was mentioning before when it comes to cash and personal assets. A retirement account is evaluated on its availability to the individual. And so if that person has the ability, and we're talking about in a legal sense, not in a cognitive capacity, just to be clear, if the person has the legal ability to withdraw funds from their retirement account, like let's say you've got a 401k or an IRA set up with Vanguard, and you call Vanguard and say, I'd like to take $50,000 out of my retirement account. If they are required to say yes, meaning that they have to listen to you, it's your money, it's your account, then basically what DHS says is that if you have the ability to do that, that money is available to you at all times. Therefore, we count it as an available asset against your asset limit. If there is a penalty for making that withdrawal, the amount of the available asset is the amount that you can withdraw minus the penalty. So they say even if you were to incur a penalty for withdrawing these assets, they still count. We just subtract the penalty out of what we count as an available asset. If the person is receiving scheduled distributions from their retirement account, it does depend on whether they could demand for the entire balance of the account to be distributed at once. If they cannot do that, then the regular distributions, whether those are being distributed monthly or yearly, those distributions are going to be countable as available assets. So again, While a person is on MAEPD, this is not a concern, but you've got to think about the eventuality that well, absolutely will stop working at some point. Again, whether it's a loss of the job or retirement. And so it gets into this idea of long-term planning that we have to address and consider what the options are so that a person can be prepared for when that eventuality comes, when they do no longer have employment options and they are no longer going to be eligible for the EPD program and presumably would have a $3,000 asset limit either for basic MA or when they move into, say, long-term care in a nursing home and the elderly waiver applies because again, you have a $3,000 asset limit for that program. So the first thing that we think about when it comes to protecting assets, preserving assets for a person during their working lifetime is the ABLE account. And I'm a fan of this, even though as a lawyer, I'm not directly involved in either setting this up or in how it is administered. So it's kind of funny, I talk about this, I promote the ABLE account, I explain it to people, but I get absolutely no income from people who set up an ABLE account because you do go and basically do this on your own. That was the idea behind it. When ABLE was developed, it started about 15 or 20 years ago and was finally passed by Congress about a little over 10 years ago now. I think it was 2014 that the law was adopted. But the idea behind it was that we have lots of people in this country that want to work, want to earn income, but are sort of hamstrung or restricted by the asset limits that apply for medical assistance or Medicaid or Social Security. And so some people who have disabilities but retain the ability to work were being forced into this scenario where you had to choose between the two. Do you refrain from working so that you can receive the benefits that are necessary for your independent living? So like in-home support, again, ride sharing, job support. Well, job support would be, I guess, kind of contradictory to this, but the idea is that if a person um, has income, has wages, has a job, that they should not have to hold themselves back, should not have to restrict themselves just so that they can stay eligible for their benefits, because both are required essentially. So ABLE came about in an effort to create an opportunity for people that do have disabilities that were dependent on the government support that comes through Medicaid and through medical assistance, have asset limits, and had to find a way to dispose of the money that they were accumulating through their job or through other means. It could also include family members giving gifts or sort of informal support in that way. But providing people with an opportunity to preserve that money, to save that money so that they could continue to work and have the resources remain available to them. So when assets are transferred to an ABLE account, they do become excluded as far as eligibility requirements are concerned, asset limits are concerned. So a person can transfer their earned income, their wages. They can also transfer their SSI or SSDI money that they receive on a monthly basis as well. The trick with ABLE is that you have to confirm or prove that you were certified as a disabled person, meaning you met the definition of a disabled person under the Social Security Act. You have to confirm or prove that that happened prior to you turning age 26. That is actually going to change very soon here. They agreed that beginning in January of 26, that age is going to be bumped up to age 46. So it does bring more people into the pool. So for people who have suffered like a TBI or another type of accident that has limited their ability to work, and required them to receive support from medical assistance, ABLE is going to be available for people who were determined to be disabled between the ages of 26 and 46 as well, now going forward. So establishing an ABLE account, like I mentioned briefly, you do not need a lawyer to do this. Lawyers are educated on this. We're familiar with how ABLE works, and so we can advise you on it. But it's a financial account. It's no different really than going to your own bank and setting up like a checking or a savings account. There are different requirements for ABLE, however, and so you should be aware that not every bank offers it as an option. What I would suggest is that if you haven't set up an ABLE account before and you are looking into it, the website savewithable.com, which is on my slide here, is a really good place to start. And that's a good place to get answers to a lot of questions for free. It's a federal program, so they have employees there, just like the Social Security Administration, where if you contact them, they will be very helpful in terms of helping somebody get set up with an ABLE account and what their requirements are. And I mentioned on the very bottom of the slide, you would just have to have a person with signature authority. So setting up a bank account, you need to either manage that account yourself or authorize somebody else to manage the account on your behalf. With the ABLE account, any person can contribute to this. Primarily, it's designed for the account beneficiary to be contributing. So again, if a person is working, earning income, we want them to be able to have an option to set that money aside so that if they do have an asset limit to remain eligible for their MA, then that money will not count against their limit. The ABLE account is restricted, though. It can only receive up to $19,000 per calendar year total. So you've got to be a little bit conservative, a little bit aware of what you're transferring over there every month. Because if you receive SSDI or wages and you've got, say, like $2,000 per month that is extra that you would like to put over into ABLE, you're not going to be able to do that every month because $2,000 per month is $24,000 in 1 year, which exceeds the $19,000 asset limit or contribution limit, I should say. So you've got to be a little bit strategic as to what funds, what assets would be contributed to the ABLE account. This also makes it prohibitive for other reasons. I suppose I finish this off real quick where the maximum that you can contribute to the account in a lifetime, if a person is on SSI, is $100,000. That limit is not applicable to somebody who is on SSDI or RSDI. So it's a little bit looser. But you should just be aware of those funding caps or those limitations, because it does restrict a person in terms of the long-term planning. So if you're a person who right now has been working and accumulating assets and have put that money away into, say, an investment account or a retirement account, if you retire or if you stop working and you pass that 4-month period and don't go back to work, and now you've got to dispose of your assets, a large retirement account that's deemed to be an available asset cannot be transferred to ABLE, because you're going to exceed that limitation of $19,000 per year. So the best way to utilize ABLE is to be contributing a little bit here and there, a set amount, say like $1,000 a month, $500 a month, whatever is helpful to set money aside. Because once you do stop working, and if you do have to apply for regular medical assistance, the assets that are in the ABLE account already are still going to be excluded. Those are not going to count if a person stops working. It's the limitation is if you have that money and you're trying to transfer it all at once to an ABLE account, then you're going to have these limitations of the $19,000 per year and potentially the $100,000 lifetime. But we're really more concerned about the $19,000 1-year limit, because lump sums or larger assets cannot be transferred to the ABLE account. So that's why it would be worth it for a person who's working and anticipating having available resources or countable resources when they stop working, that they strategically fund an ABLE account during their working career, so that as much of that money that they've earned can be set aside and excluded if they have to continue with MA support after they are done working and have now an asset limit applied. With the ABLE account, I'll just mention quickly here at the end of the slide, this is the trade-off, right? If you have an asset limit for medical assistance, and you're transferring assets over there, or you're anticipating an asset limit being applied to you in the future, once you transfer assets to an ABLE account, they do become subject to a medical assistance claim at your death. And so the state of Minnesota cannot exercise that claim during your lifetime, but they will be keeping a tab. And so at the death of the account owner or the beneficiary of that account, the state of Minnesota will evaluate whether they have a claim against the person for estate recovery, and one of the accounts that they can exercise that claim against will be whatever assets are remaining in the ABLE account. So it's highly unlikely that a person with an ABLE account will be able to transfer that money if they are on MA at the end of their life. But essentially, that's the trade-off that you make in order to stay eligible for the programs if you have asset limits.
We've
So I
got
see-
a question from the group. Go ahead and come off mute and
See
ask
that.
your question.
Hi, yeah, so the one question I have is regarding the ABLE account at 100,000. If you're on SSDI, and you can put in what you want, but like if you're on MA with that asset limit, whether you're an elderly waiver or you're on disability waiver, does that same 100,000 and then after you get 3,000 more apply, or can you have 300,000 because you were a SSDI recipient?
Yeah, so if you're an if it's about what money you are contributing to the account. If a person is on SSI and they're not, like, let's say they're getting that check every month and they're not spending through it, they can transfer it to an ABLE account, but Social Security says then you're limited to transferring $100,000 during your lifetime. But if it's SSDI that the benefit or that the person is receiving, that is unlimited. A person can transfer as much of their SSDI money over to ABLE as they wish. They're not limited to that 100,000. However, that $19,000 per year limit does apply. So you can contribute SSDI, you can contribute your wages, and you can keep putting in $19,000 per year, and you can exceed $100,000 if you're not on SSI, but it is limited to the $19,000 total in 12 months.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Great.
So, yep.
Okay. So, again, I'm just reiterate, I think ABLE is great. I think that it works really well for its purpose, but you've got to utilize it. You've got to plan to utilize it during your lifetime, because it's not a solution for a large lump sum contribution. Or, if a person is no longer working, all of a sudden they go from no asset limit to a $3,000 asset limit, and you've got to dispose of a lot of money all at once. ABLE is not an option for that. The option that would be for that would be a trust. And so I have this, I suppose, this is a slide in the meantime, just to, for people that are not totally familiar with ABLE, these are the things that it can pay for. So if you're sending over, say, $1,000 a month or $500 a month, the idea is that money is still there. It's still available to provide support to the individual. And so they refer to those as, or as the things that you can purchase as qualified disability expenses. And so this slide just gives a list of examples of what you can use the money on once it's in the ABLE account. And so I think if you read through this list, it's pretty self-explanatory, but the idea is that that this is now a resource that you've created for yourself that you can use on these expenses later on in life, or at a time when it's really necessary. So essentially, you are saving for these expenses, just like everybody else is. Employment training and support, financial management assistance. So that would be like a financial planner, your daily living expenses, your housing, your legal fees. One thing that I emphasize that people should make sure that they purchase if you're on benefits, if you're on MA, is funeral and burial during your lifetime. If you prepay for those things, DHS cannot deny those, and they are considered excluded assets. If you do not prepay for those things during your lifetime, the ability of your family to pay for those out of your assets is limited to what DHS is willing to approve, because their claim takes priority over your funeral and burial expenses. So, but if you pay for them in advance during your lifetime, they don't get to say anything. It's only that if those were not pre-purchased and now you're dealing with it, and now your family is dealing with it after your death, that they may not be able to use the money that you saved in your ABLE account to pay for those things. So what happens if you do end up in a situation where you have a large amount that has to be disposed of all at once? That's when we that's when we have the special needs trust to enter the discussion. And a special needs trust can be established by somebody who is supporting you. So that could be a parent, a grandparent, or a legal guardian could establish that. But it could also be established by the individual themselves. That's what I have on this slide below. It's called the Special Needs Trust Fairness Act of 2016. This sort of followed ABLE. We had all of this discussion about ABLE, the basis of it being that a person should retain independence. They shouldn't have to choose between their benefits. Well, then we recognize that a person who is having to set aside larger amounts in a trust should also be able to create that trust themselves. So if the person has the cognitive capacity to do so and understands the terms of the trust agreement, they can create that themselves as well as another option to dispose of assets and protect them from being countable when an asset limit does apply. The catch with a special needs trust, so I guess I should back up a little bit. The reason why this is a viable option is because there is no funding limit to this. A special needs trust can be funded with millions of dollars. I emphasize that just to make a point, right? That if you have too much money to transfer to an ABLE account all at once, this is the option that a person has to utilize if they have a need to retain their support through the county for their benefits. So the big issue, though, with a special needs trust, and this is under federal law, is that it does have to be established and funded before a person reaches age 65. A person who is, say, 66, 67, 68 years old, who has now stopped working and is transitioning from MAEPD to regular MA, cannot transfer their otherwise available assets to a special needs trust if they've already passed their 65th birthday. Federal law will not allow you to do that with a private trust. So now that really sort of draws the attention to why somebody who is on MAEPD, who is not subject to an asset limit during their lifetime, really does have to think long term about what they're going to do. Because if you stop working and the benefits are still necessary for you, in other words, the support from medical assistance, and you now have a $3,000 asset limit for regular MA or the elderly waiver, those accumulated assets are going to be countable that were not countable during your lifetime with MAEPD. And if you're over the age of 65, you cannot transfer those assets to a special needs trust and stay eligible for MA. So that means that you would have to spend through those assets that you've worked for and accumulated throughout your lifetime on your own care until they're gone, and only then can you apply again for medical assistance and your support with the waivers. There is one option that does get around the age 65 rule, and that's a pooled trust. We call this a special needs pooled trust. This is a trust that you do not create independently. You do not get to manage it independently. So with a special needs trust, you're going to have a trustee. Your trustee could be somebody like a family member. It could be a parent, it could be a brother or sister, it could be a cousin, it could also be your next door neighbor. It's basically a trustee of your choosing. Who do you want to work with on this? I should point out that this is a difference from ABLE. Again, with ABLE, we're talking about independence, promoting independence. You can manage that account yourself. If you have a special needs trust, one of the rules to maintaining those as excluded assets is that you cannot manage the trust account yourself. You have to have a trustee. So again, if you're under 65, if you're setting that trust up privately, that can be managed by somebody that you know. A pooled trust, on the other hand, is going to be managed by a professional organization. Um, there are professional fiduciaries out there in the state of Minnesota. So if you have, say, like if you don't have a parent or a brother or sister or a family member who would manage the trust for you, you can hire somebody privately. But a pooled trust is going to be managed by a specific organization. And in Minnesota right now, the only large pooled trust organization is Lutheran Social Services. And so that's going to be the option if a person is over the age of 65. They can join the pool trust managed by Lutheran Social Service. What that means is that your money is contributed to a total pool that everybody who has a trust with Lutheran Social Service is contributing to. All that money is then invested together. You still get an individual account and you still have those assets that can be utilized for you. But you're working with LSS, they're managing that money for you, and they have the decision about when you can and cannot use those assets. So it's not ideal to end up with a pooled trust. It is an option, though, for somebody who did not do planning during their lifetime and has ended up with a scenario where they have too many assets, they're over the age of 65, and they need to qualify for medical assistance. So let me see. I think we had, oh, I'll get to those here next. So the other type of trust that comes up when we're talking about a special needs trust would be referred to as a supplemental needs trust. The difference between the two, and I got a couple of questions through Noel for this, and so I'll explain this quickly, is both trusts work to exclude assets that would otherwise be countable or considered available to the person who is receiving MA. The difference between a special needs trust and a supplemental needs trust is who is funding it and what happens at the death of the beneficiary. So a special needs trust is going to be funded by the individual themselves. So this would be the person who is on MA who now has to transfer assets in order to stay eligible because of an asset limit. They are the ones funding that trust. It's referred to as a first party trust, meaning the person who is the beneficiary of the trust is funding it themselves. Because of that, the state of Minnesota does have a claim against the remaining assets of the special needs trust at the death of the beneficiary. Again, very similar to the ABLE account, the state says we'll allow you to transfer assets that will then be considered excluded as far as your eligibility is concerned during your lifetime. But at your death, in exchange, we get to exercise a claim against the remaining assets of your ABLE account or your special needs trust. A supplemental needs trust, on the other hand, is funded by anybody other than the person who is on medical assistance or Social Security. So this is primarily used by family members like parents, like brothers and sisters who want to leave money or leave resources for a person who is subject to like MA asset limits during their lifetime. So we do in my practice, in my firm, we do a lot of this type of planning for like parents who have children with disabilities, because you cannot leave them a direct inheritance if their eligibility for MA is subject to available assets. And long term, as we've been talking about, if the person is on MA EPD, you might think, well, we can, you know, leave resources for them because they don't have an asset limit. But eventually they will stop working and there will be an asset limit applied. So a supplemental needs trust is a very useful long-term planning tool for people other than the person who is on medical assistance. Because that money is coming from a different source other than the MA recipient, there is no claim. There's no estate recovery claim applied by the state of Minnesota at the death of the beneficiary. Parents or family members can direct what happens to the remaining assets after the beneficiary of the trust dies. So that means the money could go out to other family members. It could also go to charitable organizations like RISE. It could be a beneficiary at the at the termination of that type of trust. So this is something that I advise people on quite a bit in terms of their long-term planning. But I think based on, what we were talking about earlier, or actually what, Noel was mentioning to me in terms of who is attending tonight, I think the supplemental needs trust is somewhat secondary to the special needs trust in the ABLE account, as far as your understanding. Because if you are the MA recipient yourself, if you are on MA EPD, then a supplemental needs trust is not a planning option. This is for people other than the MA recipient. So again, the focus would be on the special needs trust or the ABLE account if you've got to transfer your own assets to stay eligible for these programs. I will say, because there was one question about this, what if I can't afford an attorney to help me set up a trust? With a special needs trust, the attorney is going to be paid out of those assets after the trust is established. So again, a special needs trust is usually going to be used when you've got larger amounts of money that have to be transferred, that have to be disposed of. And so the fee for setting up that trust is going to come out of that larger amount of money. The same thing with a pooled trust. If you have to utilize Lutheran Social Service, their fees are going to come out of that trust after it's established. With a supplemental needs trust, it's part of estate planning. And so we would expect that the person establishing that trust is going to be able to afford the fee themselves to set that up. With ABLE account, there is no fee other than just the fees that the bank applies themselves to setting up an account. But there's no attorney, and should be no or maybe limited legal fees if you're paying an attorney for their advice. But
Got a
but I
question in the
think
chat, Joe. Are there differences in eligible expenses for special needs trusts versus supplemental needs trusts?
that's a good question. The answer is no. As I sort of mentioned, the primary differences between these two trusts are in how they are funded and what happens when they are terminated. During the time the trust is active, they're basically the same. And so we look at a special needs trust and a supplemental needs trust as ways that a person's quality of life can be improved beyond just what government assistance provides. And so if they're putting money over into a special needs trust themselves, that money can be used for whatever the trustee determines is in their best interest. And the rules are the same for a supplemental needs trust. There is motivation to use the money in a special needs trust before the supplemental needs trust if a person has both, because the special needs trust is going to be subject to the recovery claim, whereas the supplemental needs trust will not be. But the big difference between having a trust and an ABLE account is, well, there's two big differences in the spending of the money. Number one, with an ABLE account, you are limited, like I mentioned on that slide, to what they call the qualified disability expenses. So that sort of eliminates what I would refer to as the fun stuff. There is some allowance to that, but if you have money in an ABLE account, that cannot be utilized to like pay for a vacation to Disney World. It has to be used for living expenses. Whereas if you have money in a special needs trust or a supplemental needs trust, that's what that money can be used for. You can use it to go to Disney World. You can use it to buy tickets to the Super Bowl if you want to. But it can also be used for regular fun stuff around town, like paying for uh, a bowling league. It can be used to pay for a camp. It can be used to purchase a car. A lot of people will use it to purchase an accessible van. Um, the difference then, though, between ABLE and a trust, besides what you can just spend it on, is that with a trust, you do not get to make those decisions yourself. So even though you've got a wider range of options, a wider range of things that can be purchased with trust assets, those are subject to the discretion of the trustee. The trustee gets to decide whether they are reasonable purchases or not. The beneficiary of the trust can certainly ask for things, right? And they can explain to the trustee why they want this, why they need it, but the trustee gets to decide ultimately whether or not it's a reasonable expense for the trust. I do try and encourage trustees to be very liberal with their spending. Try not to be conservative, especially when it comes to the special needs trust, because if it's not used, again, it goes back to the state of Minnesota. So I try to tell people, um, spend that money on going to Disney World, spend that money on going to the Super Bowl, even though it seems crazy and you wouldn't necessarily do that with your own money. This is meant to improve this person's quality of life. Uh, so yeah, there are differences in the eligible expenses from an ABLE account to the trust accounts, but there are not really differences between what money can be used for, whether it comes from a special needs trust or a supplemental needs trust. So on this slide, I do have a quick comparison of the options here. Is basically what I was just talking about, with a person who has assets that they've accumulated during their lifetime. Perhaps if they've been on MAEPD and they have not had an asset limit, when you do get to that point where you have to dispose of assets in order to stay eligible for medical assistance going forward, you have three options. It's spending it down, which may not be feasible if you've accumulated too much. But if you've only got like a few $1,000s over the asset limit, um, it might be reasonable to do that. And as I mentioned before, you, after 4 months of not working, you do still have the rest of the year to be able to spend down or dispose of those assets before the asset limit will disqualify the person. So maybe 12 months is enough time to spend through those personal assets that they've accumulated. Able account is a good option to save money during your lifetime in order to ensure that that money will be excluded um, after you stop working. A special needs trust is also another option, and this may be the best option for transferring, say, like a retirement account, because there's no limit on the contributions like there are with the ABLE. The downside, again, is that though if you transfer to a trust, you don't get to manage that money yourself. You do get to manage that money yourself in an ABLE account. And so when you're considering your own circumstances, just understand that there are options out there, but those options present different circumstances. And so you have to be aware of, is ABLE going to be the best for my situation, or is it necessary for me to set up a trust and appoint a trustee to manage this money for me because I need that in order to stay eligible for my benefits? So one of the questions that Noel had sent me is one better than the other? Is ABLE better than a special needs trust? And I would say it completely depends on the time and the circumstances that you are utilizing them. So again, ABLE, very useful for a person during their lifetime, very useful for small amounts that need to be disposed of in order for a person to stay eligible for their programs. But you're limited in how much you can put in there, and then you're limited as to what you can spend it on. However, you do get to make those decisions yourself. Special needs trust, very useful for the purpose of receiving larger amounts of assets. Um, and you can spend it on things more liberally. It can be used for fun stuff, not just living expenses. However, the limitation is that it does have to be set up and funded prior to you reaching age 65, prior to the beneficiary reaching age 65. So it does require some pre-planning for that. And the downside of having to appoint a trustee rather than being able to manage that money yourself. So there are positives and negatives to each of these options. Overall, the positive, though, is that there are options that people can utilize to both save money, earn money, save money, and still have the benefit of those assets. Even if you reach a point where you are no longer working and you have asset limits applied to you in order to stay eligible for the MA support services that you get through the waiver. Just know that there are options to take care of it. And so, yeah, you want to talk to somebody who's knowledgeable in those options, who can evaluate your situation, and who can advise you on what the best route to take or the best options to utilize would be. Just start thinking about it. If you are on MAEPD, if you are on SSDI, and you are not subject to asset limits right now, just know that at some point you will stop working. And it's important that you have sort of prepared for that moment financially, just like the rest of us. I think this slide, since we're at almost at 6:30 here, I think I'll skip this, but for the most part, or not get too much into it. But guardianship does play a role in all of this. I should say that guardians do have the authority to establish an ABLE account on your behalf or on a person's behalf if they are not able to do so themselves. However, guardians do not have any authority to manage the ABLE account. The legislature in Minnesota has been absolutely clear about this. This is done on purpose. Just because a guardian can go and set up an ABLE account on behalf of a person, that does not give them the authority to manage and make decisions regarding that account after it's established. It still has to be run by the beneficiary. There is a bit of a workaround here where on the ABLE account paperwork, when you're establishing an account, you can appoint an account representative. And I know a lot of guardians have used that to successfully appoint themselves to that role. I'm not going to promise that's going to be possible. Again, I have no control over that as a lawyer. It's up to the bank, it's up to the fiduciary, but that is a potential workaround for guardians to manage an ABLE account on other people's behalf. So just know that that's part of the process. Guardians do not have any special authority to manage a trust account, though. That is set up entirely separately. They're not authorized by the court to establish, or I'm sorry, to manage a trust account, but their status as guardians does allow them to establish a special needs trust on a person's behalf. And if they are establishing it, they can appoint themselves as the trustee of that trust. So again, guardianship is playing a role. There is an effect if a person is subject to guardianship. And so you just have to be conscious. If you're listening to this as a person who is a guardian, understand that you have authority and can play a process or can play a role in this process, but your ability to manage personal assets is very limited. So you have to be aware of what those limitations are and adjust accordingly. But then also, if you're a person who is subject to guardianship, understand what the guardian can and cannot do for you in terms of helping your financial situation. So that's all my slides. And I think, Noelle, unless you want to correct me, I think that we covered pretty much all of the questions.
We have. And to answer a question in the chat, this has been recorded and the recording will be saved and we will publish it on Rise's social media channels so that you can find it to watch in the future. And I think Joe can probably send his slides over too.
I can send my slides over, yes. And I see the question that was put on the chat. I would suggest just real quickly for other resources, use that website if you need to, or if you want to find out more information about ABLE. It's savewithable.com. I would say when it comes to special needs trusts, if you're looking for more information, there's lots of it out there on the internet. But state of Minnesota has what we call the Disability Law Center. And there's also a website called lawhelpmn.org that provide free resources to gather more information on this. Also, Lutheran Social Service has free resources regarding the pooled trust. Other than that, you are going to probably have to engage an attorney in order to go further with trust planning. And so certainly that attorney would advise you, hopefully, to the best of their ability on the rules and the terms surrounding setting up a trust.
Any other questions for Joe? If not, then I can say thank you to everybody for coming. And thank you, big thank you to Joe for doing this for us. Really appreciate it and appreciate all the resources.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Thank
Joe.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Noel,
Thank you.
for
Thanks a lot.
setting this up, and thank you to everybody else for taking time out of your night to watch. I appreciate it. Um, and just real quick to answer the question, what are the fees for setting up a trust? That's going to vary by the lawyer. I'm not going to answer that because this is going to be on YouTube, and I'm not going to have anybody hold that to me. Because the circumstances could be different in different scenarios. But just know that the fees are going to be applied by the lawyer that you hire. So that's something that you'll have to determine for yourself. So again, thank you, Noel. Thank you,
Thank
everybody
you.
who attended tonight. Hope you have
Thank
a
you
good
so
rest
much,
of the night.
everyone.